Hey everybody, welcome to this video, and in this particular video we will be writing our first Daml Smart Contract and build and test it using DPM, which is the Daml Package Manager. Now if you're somebody who is just getting started on Canton network by building your first project, the first place you should come to is docs.canton.network. It is an official documentation to build on top of the network as well as find all the tools and SDKs. Now if you are the first person here, you should go to the app development category where you will find different modules available that takes you the entire life cycle from 0 to 100 about building on Canton. If you're currently sitting in an Ethereum hackathon thinking about building your first Canton project, module 2 is specifically for you, so you can compare the different nuances of Ethereum versus Canton, whether it's the privacy model or whether it's the different paradigm or nuances in a smart contract language. In this particular module you can go through the entire page to build your first project, but in this video we will be writing our first Daml smart contract and use DPM to build and test it. Now you must be thinking, what is this DPM that this guy is talking about? So now to talk more about DPM is actually Daml Package Manager. It's our CLI tool that we use to build and test our Daml smart contract, but it also allows you to interact with your smart contract, to play around with it. It has all the tools and the resources available to inspect your smart contract and basically do everything possible as a CLI, including having some different components to have different features. So I feel like this is something that we should get started by and write the first Daml contract. And you know what? It's time to go to the actual demo. Let's come back to the VS Code window that we have set up. Okay, so now we will just install it. Now for me, DPM is already installed, so it might just come back install the latest version of Daml SDK, but I feel like I already have the Daml SDK with the latest version. If not, then hey, you can never be super updated all the time, am I right? So let's wait for it to get installed and come back when it is done. So it's still getting installed. As you would see, its latest SDK version of for Daml is 3.4.11, and it's downloading the whole SDK, and it's at 44 45, pretty fast, right? So it's getting installed, and let's wait till it gets installed. I think it's a good time to take a transaction, like, and it's installed. Now it says please add DPM to your path, and after that successfully you will be able to use DPM. But since I already have it in my path, I don't think I should need to do that again. I'll just type DPM version. So when you say DPM/v, it gives you the version of DPM available in your system here. But if you want to check specifically what version of Daml SDK does it use, we will use DPM version, and when you type this command, it gives you the Daml SDK available, and it's in the green it shows you the active version that you will be using in your YAML file when you're creating a project. Here is 3.4.11, so we are super updated, and that's a good thing to go. So now you would ask me what to do now. So let's explore what DPM does. So when you type DPM, it gives you a list of all the commands available. So I would say never a good time to explore a command than now, right? So DPM commands have installation, the meta commands, then you have the DPM SDK. So you build a certain Daml file into a dar, which you use to upload on devnet, testnet, mainnet. Then there is a sandbox command available, a Canton console connecting to a remote participant, and you can do a sandbox environment. Just clean a package. Code generation, Java compiler, JavaScript compiler is also there. So no matter who you are, there is a place for you all already when you are trying to develop it. My personal favorite is Damlek. It is compiler and IDE backend for Daml programming language. So it is a good place to be, and it basically decouples everything. And you know what? Let's talk about it when we even use it. The one that we would be using is new. So DPM new gives you a list of templates that you can use to start your first project scaffolding. So let's go. We will sort of go all the way down. I want to clear this whole just to get the mess out. We will say DPM new list. So when we type DPM new list, it gives you a list of all the available templates already available, right? So it has Daml intro choices, compose constraint, Daml scripts and whatnot, empty skeleton to get started, finance life cycle, payoff modeling, settlement, upgrades, multi-package, quick start finance, quick start Java, script, skeleton, so much, right? So, but since we are making a demo, we will do everything from the scratch, right? So we will be creating a sample smart contract, simplest ever, Alice and Bob, the classic demo names like John Doe, but well, Alice and Bob for Daml. Just make a normal invoicing Daml smart contracts where you can either pay, accept, or debate, a certain invoice with each other, and we'll add some testing use cases, and then we will use Daml build and Daml test to see how it all works together. So, but we need to get started. How do we do that? We will use the DPM new. Now we will add the name of the project that we want to create in this target folder here is, let's just say, demo J. My name is Jatin, my short form is J. And then we will specify which template do we want to use, but since it's a demo, I just want to do everything from scratch. Well, I know my way around Daml, right? So we will use the empty skeleton, and voila, we have a new project of demo J. It always gives you all the files needed, attributes, git ignore, and ignore everything. The main file that we need here is daml the YAML file. It specifies the DPM SDK version, the name, source, version of the DPM. It gives you all the scripts available. Now it's actually a good thing because now you don't need to worry about version mismatch and whatnot, and that's why I use this particular feature, and I would advise you to do the same. So let's again clear the terminal. It gives us a good room to breathe. Let's zoom out so we can look at the code, and we will create a new file in this. Let's come to the main folder here. We will not this one, but here we'll create another subfolder called as Daml because that's the source, and inside the Daml folder we'll create like invoice.daml, and now we have a new Daml file generated and we need to start coding. So if you really want an extension that helps you basically code better in Daml, you can even go to the extension, type Daml like this, and I'm pretty sure it will give you this one. So this is a Daml by Digital Asset Holdings LLC. It helps you to trust more and like build better in Daml. But you also have a like Daml AI coder by the Tenzero. I would say this is also pretty much good, like an AI powered Daml smart contract assistant, and this is also something that you can try. Then we have one from LimeChain, like a Daml formatter. You can also use this if you want to start coding in Daml, right? This is also something. Let's try out this one. But yeah, we have more. So as you would see, we already have some extensions available, but in our case I am just gonna uninstall it all. I want to show everything on the at scratch as possible. So you know what, no shortcut for us. Normal raw code in front of you, me, you typing out the code right now. Okay, so let's get started. Module. So we start a Daml code by specifying a module invoice where, and if you start learning Daml, you would realize a lot of it is lesser than loops and functions and logics, and more of about defining the axis of things or like access control logic. So that's why Daml might feel a really good space for you if you're coming from a very complex Solidity or Rust background, and it is a really good language if you ask me. So let's import now. So as you would see, we already have module invoice where. Now we will start the whole Daml smart contract. So now we need to say Daml script, or we need to import Daml script here because, well, it's very important. And these are the major two things that we need to be done. And now our main thing is gonna be to squeeze the logic, the use case into actual Daml access way. But how that looks like is, you know what, let's get started anyway. So in Daml, instead of functions and whatnot, we have templates. So instead of calling smart contracts, we call templates, right? So we start by thing called as templates. Template would be invoice. Nice, thank you. And invoice is the template in this case. Now inside the template, you need to define the parameters. So our invoice will have multiple parameters. Who is the buyer? Who is the seller? How much of the amount? And well, is it paid or not, right? So we need to define all that as a parameter of an invoice. So let's describe the parameter. And you might feel like I'm typing English, but to be honest, Daml, it genuinely is pretty good. So let's get started. So template invoice with, now we have to describe the parameter. So let's just say we have a seller, we have a buyer, we need to specify amount, we need to define if it is paid or unpaid, or maybe the description. The description of the invoice, like it should be an invoice for construction. So we can just define an invoice description, paid, amount, buyer, seller. Yeah, I think that's pretty much enough for parameters that we can get started, right? So now we need to get started with, so a seller would be a party. So if you don't know what a party is, so party is basically the Canton's version of an address, but in a UTXO style. So instead of addresses on Canton, you get a party ID to, well, interact with the blockchain. So a seller will be one party, buyer will be a totally one party, amount will be in decimal. Similarly, paid would be more of like a condition. Like yes or no. So we will define it as a boolean. Description would be a text. Yep, I think that's pretty much it. So now we have our first template already ready. As you would see, we have template of invoice with the parameters of seller, buyer, amount, paid, boolean of a paid, like logic, and a description about it. So this defines our first template parameter and just defining of the template. Now it does not end here. Now we need to define where. That means that now we have defined like all this, like buyer, seller, and whatnot, but we need to define who has what access. And this access control, this is known as proof of stakeholders. This gives Daml a specific age to actually provide the best access possible and privacy on the smart contract level. So let's define signatory. So signatory should be the seller, because seller is selling the whole thing. Then buyer should be the observer, right? So yeah, we need to keep the buyer as an observer. Or I guess that's it. Observer would be buyer. So now we have defined access control of what's the parameter of an invoice, what will do what, and how much access. The signatories are basically the admins in a way, where they are the ones that needs to sign for an action to take place, where observers are the one who are allowed to see the change of the state of the smart contract, the things get emitted, the events get emitted, how things actually get executed, and the basically everything that leads into the whole smart contract. You need to be an observer to do it. Observer, signatory, everything in between. But if you're not everything in between, you can't see anything, and that's what makes Canton's privacy model special. So you're basically seeing the whole proof of stakeholder mechanism in real time, right? So let's move ahead. Now in template, we everything is defined. Now it's a time to make sure that nobody gives a negative or a zero invoice, right? We can use ensure, um, ensure amount. Ensure amount should be more than, I guess, 0.0. So this basically what it does here is that it ensures that whatever invoice amount that you declare here should be more than zero. So this basically protects our invoice from all the people who want to create like a negative or a zero invoice. We definitely want a positive numerical as an invoice. Even if I want to get an invoice of 1 cent, it should be 1 cent. An invoice of $0 doesn't make sense, right? Even 0 cc doesn't make sense. But yeah, This is the first structure. So congratulations, we are able to not only code the whole thing, but we are also able to define what a template looks like, how signatory and observer looks like, and even how you would define parameter inside it, right? Isn't that cool? Now we need to move ahead into the next part of a Daml smart contract, which is the functions. Wait, smart contracts like Solidity has function. So what's the Daml version of that? We have something called as choices. So choices is something that you define inside the template that acts as a function. You can define logic, you can define loops, you can basically define how something should react in a way using the choice. So we will write our first choice here inside the whole template, right? So let's get started. Choice, right? So now choice is basically what functions are for in Daml. Now we need to okay, just want to make sure it's inside the template. So now choice would be that a buyer needs to pay the invoice that the seller is putting out there, and it should basically just come back with a receipt once they pay with it. So yeah, I mean, so let's do two things. We will be adding two choices. Either a buyer can pay an invoice or can dispute with it, right? So if there is a dispute within the whole thing, then there should be a way to dispute or raise a concern, or if it's called good, it needs to be a pay. So what I'm gonna do here is define a choice or a functionality of paying it, and then we will just move forward to define the dispute, right? So I would say choice pay contract ID of receipt. I would say that is pretty much it. So we need the pay. Once you pay, basically, then it should have a receipt that you have already paid with the contract ID. I think that basically makes sense. So that should be how the flow looks like. And as we move ahead about like code, now we need to define the controller, who is the buyer. Now you would ask me, Jatin, what is a controller? Now we have signatory and observer. What is a controller? So this particular choice has to be controlled by the buyer, because buyer is the one who is actually deciding that if they are paid using the invoice or they need to pay the invoice, right? In any condition like that, buyer is the one that needs to put the final word here. So we need to define the controller as the buyer to be able to control this whole thing, right? But what would they do? Nope, do not recommend me this description. We will now type do. Geez. Yeah, but okay, Jatin, isn't this pure English? Well, I told you Daml was simpler, right? You didn't believe me in the first place. Now, controller is the buyer. Now, what should this choice do? Now, here is a chance to define the logic inside this function of what would this function do in the first place. Now, if I am okay to pay, then it should create a receipt that I am done with the payment, right? So, what would it do is create a receipt. It should create a receipt with, again, whenever we say with, we have to define the parameters that we want to be inside of it, right? So once a receipt is generated, we would want to have, of course, the seller, we want to have the buyer, we want to have the amount, I guess. We also want to have if it is paid. So if it is paid, I think it should be defined in a receipt if it is paid. You know what? I mean, it's anyway paid, so we don't need that. So you know what? We can go over with description. So if it is already paid, we don't need to define the boolean, right? Yes or no, because it is already paid. So who is the seller? Who is the buyer? How much was the amount? And what is the description? Like what is the invite is for? That would do it. Okay. Now we have officially paid the Daml expert in the room. So now another choice is dispute the whole thing. It should also come with contract ID and disputed it. Invoice should be the return. Yeah, invoice should be the return. So for example, if somebody is disputing your invoice in the first place, then I think it should return with smart contract ID and the disputed invoice, right? So here the controller needs to be the seller in a way. um but anyway, I think we don't need to define that because it is a dispute, right? So we just need to define what the disputed invoice should have as a parameter, I guess. But at the same time, we need a reason why it got dispute in the first place. So I think the best would be to have a reason into this whole thing. So we need to have a reason that would be a text here. So we need to have a reason of why it got like you know disputed in the first place. And now we define who is the controller here. Controller is again the buyer because buyer is the one who is actually putting the dispute. So controller has to be the buyer. Now when the buyer is the controller, they are basically giving you a reason, and after the reason all you are doing is just come back with a dispute invoice back to the seller, and that is what we need to define, right? Seller, buyer, pretty much the same thing. Of course, the description of the invoice and amount in the invoice. I think the reason that we will define when we want to dispute it, that should also be a part of it. But that said, now we have officially wrote a proper Daml Smart Contract code, and I mean, pardon me if I'm looking like this, because I'm talking to you guys and I'm also writing the code at the same place, right? So it gotta be the human interaction here. But coming on to the whole thing, so what did we learn in the end, people? We have wrote so much code, right? We have a module, we have an import Daml script, we defined our first template, which was the invoice with the parameters, and we defined the access controls. We ensured that it should be more than zero, of course, it should not be negative or zero. We defined our first choice, which is the functionality, that if I'm okay with the pay, then here is the pay, you will get a receipt of the pay. But if I want to dispute the invoice, then I should have a reason, and you are just giving me seller buyer description amount and reason back, right? This is definitely not the whole Daml smart contract, but you would see how you would define a choice and a template and everything up. Now I'm going to complete the rest of the smart contract, so we don't need to waste time here. Like, and like this, the whole smart contract is complete. To be honest, it took me like almost close to 5 more minutes to do this, but well, it's a demo. Now what we have done rest is define a template structure of what the receipt would look like. We have defined a template structure of what would a disputed invoice would look like everything else. Then what we have done is, so when you write a Daml smart contract, you need to define some test scripts in the Daml smart contracts against which you can test if everything works right or not, right? For example, we have a new testing flow here that you would see. The testing flow says that you will identify the script if the party is Alice and Bob, right? Then you would define the whole seller should do this, define the services in Q1. Then you have a receipt ID that should be submitted by the buyer, and receipt ID should be queried, and buyer should have a receipt ID that which is verified, and if it is not found, that means it is not right. And sincerely, we also add one more submit must fail. So I mean, to be honest, an amount should not be a bad invoice. I don't want to have like a negative invoice. For example, something like -$100 doesn't make sense. So even though we have insure using the insure amount, but it doesn't hurt to add a stress testing in terms, right? So I would say we have a pretty good Tamil smart contract here. So what we would do is we need to take our terminal all the way up here. So because we are done with the Daml script, now we need to use the DPM to take it next in the action. So let's get started on this one. Basically, now we need to cd into the target file. So our target project is inside the demo. It is known as demo j, where our whole Daml file exists. So let's go to cd demo j, and yep, we are at a good place. So the first thing that we do is to try out DPM build. So what DPM build does is convert your whole Daml smart contract into a dar file. Yeah, I mean, it basically does that. So the dar file will be used to push onto the ledger using an API call with your ledger API to be able to deploy on top of devnet testnet mainnet, right? So we will click on DPM build and let this whole smart contract convert into an actual dar file. So as you would see, it ran smoothly. Just here and here warnings, but well, we are the coders. We don't care about the warnings, do we? Right? But what to think about is created the dar file here. So we will go to the Daml, we'll go to dist, and then as you would see here, we have a dar file that we can use to upload on the ledger. But that is the least of our issues right now. Come back to it. Happily completed with the Daml build. Now we need to test if the whole thing is good, if there are issues against the Daml contract or not. We have written some test scripts that will help us identify that. So for that, again, clear to keep it pretty simple, we will use DPM test. So DPM test basically use all the test scripts that we have written to create test. You can get a test summary here, right? Internal templates, 3 defined, 2 exercised, internal templates choices, 5 defined, 1 exercised. And why 1 out of 5 is because we have only written scripts for the pay, not for the disputed, not for the archived, only for the pay, because it's a demo. But you can write more complex testing scripts to give better testing and debugging experience. And overall we have 100%, 100%, 100% external test. So we have passed this whole thing with the flying colors. Now DPM test, DPM build, you have a dar file, you have a Daml smart contract which is totally built. And this is why I love DPM, because it makes building on top of Canton much more easier in a lot of ways. You can actually use the rest of one of the commands that we were talking about is DPM command known as tpmlec, which is basically a compiler and IDE backend for your Daml language. So we will use DPM, and I'm just going to show you what happens. Damlec. So when we type this, you need a command dpm damlec, and now you need to invoke the compiler. But okay, so we need to define the path where your dar file is installed to be able to use this, but let's see it in action, right? Why hesitate since we are already this far? And let's see it in action. And Damlec. So now one of the things that I love about Damlec is inspect dar. So what inspect dar does is basically just decouples your dar file. It gives you every dependencies, every package, but most of all it gives you your package hex string, not the name, not the version. Your package hex is your identity on the Canton ledger, and instead of going around in the binary or trying to fetch it from the ledger, you can use this. You can route the path of your dar profile and get it. So let's see that in action as the last thing that we do on this one, right? So we have DPM damlac inspect dar. Now we need to give the root for the dar. So dar is currently available in Daml slash dist, my bad, dist slash, we have the name of the dar file here. We will just gonna copy the path, and well, I am really messy, but that's what makes me authentic, in a way. um Yes, so since we're already inside the target folder, we don't need to give like the whole path, but we can give this particular path of .daml slash test slash demoj of this path, and I hope this works. Nice. So as I would say, it gives us a good uh, a lot of things here, but it gives you the hex string of almost everything that works. Dar archive contains the following packages. It gives you all the following packages in this one. So you might not know what to make sense of this one, but you can just copy paste it into any AI model and ask it to simplify it for you. So it might give you like a table format or something of the available packages, their hex strings and whatnot. You can store it for future references, but this is a very useful program if you're working on top of Canton, and we will clear everything up. As always, I'll put this whole thing on my GitHub if you want to use it. The link will be in the reply of this demo. But thank you so much for basically working with me on this demo and to understand how DPM works. DPM is an amazing tool that can be used as the best experience to develop on top of Canton. So make sure that you try it, build it, and if you build anything, tag me on Discord or X and let me know how I can help you. So till then, bye bye.